Hello, everybody. Good to see you again. Welcome to another episode of Diversitas, a show at the crossroads of business, diversity, and culture, or diversity, business, and culture, however you want it. Today, I have an old friend of mine. He just reminded me that he used to be on the other side of previous shows. Keaton Nichols is with us today. He is the host of his own podcast called a Nicholsworth. And I wanted to catch up with Keaton to see what he's doing, to see what his podcast is about, and just to catch up. Keaton, how you doing, my man?
Michael, thank you so much for the introduction. I appreciate it. I'm doing well. I'm enjoying doing the podcast every day and stuff like that. I've been learning a lot since I was producing content for you all as well. That was an exciting time, certainly, and it helped springboard me in a lot of ways to the things that I did after that too. But things are going great. I think there's a lot of things happening in the world right now, as there always is. There's a particular flavor on it, I think, that always needs some interpretation. And so, that's what I'm out here to do. It's not just for young people, it's for everybody, but that's kind of what's been up lately and what I'm excited for.
So yeah, I'm glad you did that. You said that because the first question I had for you, and I want the audience to kind of get a sense, is like, what is a Nicholsworth? What is your vision for a Nicholsworth?
Yeah, so Nicholsworth is a podcast that for some reason actually has a good name. I almost never have good names.
Oh my God.
But that one
very
kind of
clever.
came to me in a dream or something. I don't know. But anyway, it's a podcast that focuses on the news of the day, the news, politics, pop culture, and sports news of the day. But what we like to do on a Nicholsworth, it's my opinion, of course, that I'm giving, but I also like to open it up to the audience to kind of share their interpretations of the news of the day. I like to go deeper than just the headlines. And so that's kind of what we focus on. What are the 2 or 3, kind of most important stories of the day, and not just identifying them, because we have a million different ways, of course, that we can receive news and information now. But do we have a lot of ways that we can break down and interpret that news? That's where I really think people begin to grow and sort of be able to understand different perspectives and become better as a society when they can go a little bit deeper than what the headlines sometimes offer us. So that's kind of the idea behind a Nicholsworth. I kind of wanted to attack a podcast from a different perspective because, as you know, I spent a lot of time in radio.
Yes.
And radio is a totally different animal than podcast entirely.
How so?
And the reason why I say that is because, I think, doing daily radio, I used to do daily radio. It was 3 hours a day that we did a show. It was me and a couple other young people who, put on an absolutely fantastic program, that was kind of for everybody, and, creating on a daily basis, kind of like that. There are a lot of similarities, but creating for a live audience of which you're, taking callers, there's commercials every 20 minutes. Or 30 minutes or so. And, there's advertisers, there's sponsors, there's drives, there's, all types of things, the business, if you will, of a radio station.
Right.
When you're there, you're a host that fills a particular role. And the cool thing about being a host, especially where I was at WURD, is that I have the opportunity to kind of be myself and my own personality within that role. And that's very cool. With a podcast, it's a lot different because you're not only carving out your content, if you will, like what you're going to say, what topics you're going to cover, all that other stuff, but the structure around that show, right? Whereas if you're at a radio station, the station is the structure.
Right.
If you have a podcast, you have to build that structure out intentionally yourself, which is great, of course, because you can make that platform exactly what you want. You can make it look and sound and feel exactly how you want. The tough part is you got to get that distribution out, which I'm sure you're aware of, having a podcast yourself.
Yes.
You've got to do that extra work of getting that podcast out, marketing, advertising, the bells and whistles, and things like that of a podcast. So it's like a lot more of your time and attention goes towards that kind of stuff.
I was going to say, so what have you been doing and I want to get back to your radio experience in a minute, but what have you been doing to kind of get the word out about a Nicholsworth?
Social media is a powerful tool, and and that includes now like things like YouTube, of course, which is a part of Google's, sort of large network of tools and things that you can use. I've come to, sort of get more involved with Twitch, which is a, kind of a gaming platform, mostly, but there are tons of streamers on there that do different types of content and things like that too. So opening myself up to that audience was kind of important this year too. I'm a big video gamer, so that there was a lot of crossover there, being able to access another audience, and so far it's actually been pretty successful at grabbing a few interested patrons on Twitch and things like that. So it's I think a mix of like finding which outlets are sort of appropriate for your content. I have a news commentary show, right? Like, and there's certain audiences that's going to hit well with, and there's certain audiences that might not care, and that's the internet nowadays. Right. When you're on social media and when you're on your main engine is driving through that social media and the internet, you've got to find creative ways that you can, position yourself and your content within the stream of attention that the internet can bring, which is of course unlimited, but you've got to find your lanes and you've got to be really good in those lanes. That's what I've discovered.
Who's your target audience?
Now, my target audience would technically be like 25 to 39, 40. I don't know. There are these, sort of random brackets of ages that I've heard in terms of like millennials and Gen Z and everything else like that. Here's what I've found so far. Like, I definitely target, my content is targeted for people within that range, 25 to 40, let's say. What I've found is that having these conversations for people outside of that age bracket on either side of it, right, even though it's not necessarily targeted for them, there's an interest there, if not only for the perspective of what that particular demographic group kind of feels and thinks. I certainly give my perspective, but other people do too. And so I do think that, much like my time on the radio in Philadelphia there, it was intended for young people, but I got a lot of other groups that were interested in what we were saying, if nothing more than to just listen in. And so I like that, sort of, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where maybe it's just me because I'm strange, but I've been in somewhere in public and maybe talking with a person that I know, or maybe that I just met, and we get engaged in a conversation and you start to see other people not in the conversation or anything, total strangers that are kind of like leaning in and leaning over, like, what are they talking about? Or that's right, interesting. Or you could tell that they're kind of, listening and kind of nodding along, or, wanting to kind of chime in. And I love that feeling, especially it happened to me a lot actually in Philly, where that, people would kind of say, hey, I think you're right. You all are talking about, I think you're right about that. Creating that kind of environment around the podcast is really important for me. It was really important whenever I was starting too. Because I want other people to be in on that conversation too, even if it's not necessarily in their language or at their pace or whatever else.
So understanding your target audience is, or at least your initial target audience is between 25 and 39. How do you go about identifying topics to really tackle?
I try and keep it I try and keep it simple first. I work from the inside out. I look at the news every day. I'm doing a Nicholsworth every day now. Previous seasons of it, we were doing it 3 times a week. Once a week. We did season 2 once a week. So, season 4 now, we're doing it on a daily basis. And so that means every single day staying on top of what's happening. And I was just explaining this to a friend a little bit earlier this week, that news gathering in this sense, when you do a daily show or a daily news program, is a constant process. So even after I do a show, I'm still sometimes on Twitter looking for content and everything else like that. So it becomes a steady stream sort of pursuing information, and you find out not only what's trending for the moment, but what trends over time. And I think that's the most important thing as a producer or as a news gatherer, somebody that's looking for content on a daily basis, is that you've got to be able to notice trends over time. There might be something today that would appeal to that group of 25 to 39, let's say, that's like a dead on news story. You don't have to kind of zhuzh it up or anything else like that. It is what it is. Boom. But then there might be times when, those news stories aren't necessarily the hottest thing of the day. Still got a show. There's still things to talk about, certainly. And so that's when you have to kind of, pull in sort of content from trends that might go up or down, little small pieces of news that might, that you hear of on Twitter and things like that are trending. That's kind of how I pull that news in sometimes whenever there's not an obvious story there. And so from what I've noticed, a lot of what's trending is people, that age group 25 to 40 is what motivates and what drives the trending topics, if you will, on
And
most internet
what are
sites.
they interested in right now?
I think, and in general, if we have to get more specific on certain things on that, because like I think young people, just the other day as an example, we were talking about jobs in general, but this specific area of jobs we were talking about is the idea that a lot of lower end, lower wage jobs are starting to pay $2, $3, $4, $5 more per hour than they were during or before the pandemic, and that represents a shift. But a lot of young people, a lot of people in general, still aren't taking these jobs, right? So there's a dynamic there. There's a reason why that's happening, specifically, for young people. And so I think having that conversation, you understand that young people are after something different when it comes to their work life, mental health balance. It's something that our parents and our grandparents' generations, they certainly understand this concept. But I think, for a lot of this generation, it has started a lot earlier in terms of us saying, you know what, whatever is out there for us in the work business, busy world out there might not be worth this particular part of my mental, health. It might not be worth my sanity, so to speak. And I'm not saying that young people are always choosing their mental health over work in the hustle, but I think the conversation having that conversation a lot more in the public and kind of moving towards that is what we seem to be seeing right now of young people.
It seems to me that, and I'd be interested in your perspective, that COVID actually has been an accelerant, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Towards that happening. So people in my generation, you got people in my generation who still are like, I want to go back to the office. Maybe not every day, but 3 days a week. They just feel more comfortable in that environment. But it seems to me that younger people, younger generations, were really trending away from the kind of office being kind of your work environment, anyway, and that
Yep.
and COVID has kind of been an accelerant to push that forward. What's your perspective?
That's exactly right. And even before the pandemic was really known to many people in the world, and it shifted a lot of work patterns. Um, there was a major push, and what I saw is a lot of companies sort of moving towards more technology based practices for daily business or for whatever else is going on. Not that we were anticipating in 2019 that we were anticipating, things like Zoom meetings or, live, shows over video like this would become somewhat of a norm over the next year. But, we were kind of leaning towards that reality anyway. Is it efficient to have us travel from our homes to a central hub or to an office or anything else like that, utilizing gas resources and most importantly time, right? Like to and from a place of work that could be done from, let's say, your house, right? But that's that was one glaring example, like I said, that became very obvious in 2020 as a way to move. But in terms of the pandemic sort of pushing forward narratives, pushing forward rather, sort of this movement of wanting to go more, be more digital, be more efficient as workers. I think that was very strong even beforehand. And now what you see is that when we were, I don't want to say forced, but we were kind of forced as a society to operate in a sense where we said, look, we can't be, having people drive to work in droves and things like that. How can we get business done? The answer was yes. And how can we get business done? The answer was, using the vast amount of technology that we have now. So now to walk back from that is going to be difficult, to convince a lot of, especially young people. I think, more traditional folks that are used to that 9 to 5 and that pattern, I don't think many of them will mind as much. But I think for young people who were already looking for a reason to, take this whole to and from work thing off the table, I think it's going to be very difficult to roll back, and I think companies will have to adjust.
So when we talk about young people, really anybody though who has that option, you're really talking about the kind of professional class of people, as opposed, because there's still like millions of service jobs that where you have to be where you got to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
You gotta, and so, but to your point, those are the jobs that are having um, challenges, filling those jobs because people just they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to do it, right?
It's one of it's I think it's one of the most fascinating things to happen um in this post-pandemic world that, I'm continually having conversations about this on the podcast, and we'll actually have a guest who works at Philly Works and is able to kind of interpret, a lot more of what's going on from that perspective. But I think it's
Hmm.
fascinating, right? Because these were jobs that for so long, so many people were saying, look, these people deserve, before pandemic, right? These
Hmm.
people deserve more than $8, $9, $10 an hour. These are
Right,
jobs that require 14, 15, 16. And now we're actually seeing that from
right,
these companies.
right.
And it's not because these companies had a great awakening during the course of the pandemic. They spent so much time at home that suddenly, oh, maybe we should compensate our workers in a
No, the
in
market
a
is
fair
changing.
way. They exactly. I was going to say, you said the M
Market,
word. The market, they're understanding what's happening to the market, and those prices are a reflection of that understanding.
right.
And I think also, people's refusal even to take it at quote unquote what they understand as market rate, market value for that job, people not taking it at market value also says something about the market as well. And we ought to be paying attention to these trends in terms of which jobs are the ones that are being passed over, which ones are the ones, most desired. And I think society in this technology jump that we had in the past year will start to address those issues as quickly as possible. And the rest, well, again, I think the companies are just going to have to start paying people more. If you want to
Hmm.
show up, if you want people to show up at your job or at your place of work, you're going to have to start paying people more. And I do think that's a generally good thing so long as it stays above where our inflation rates are
Well,
rising.
it's interesting because I mean, obviously, the pandemic has had an impact, across sectors. I mean, just every kind of imaginable area of our lives has had an impact. And what I was thinking
Mm-hmm.
about as you were talking is, you kind of briefly discussed your journey. When you started in radio, and then you're kind of embarking on this podcast journey. And
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of, so before the pandemic happened, I was listening to, a number of podcasts, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
listening, but most of them were probably 90% of them were sports related.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that people are seeing this. I mean, if you look at the business pages, if you look at if you're just paying attention to what's happening, that people are seeing this this podcast thing as a viable economic model, right? And again, I think that COVID has acted as an accelerant to get people to embrace it even more,
Mm-hmm.
um, because everything is so segmented now in terms of how people get their information, how
Yep.
people their entertainment. Like everybody's it's really all about the phone, right?
Yep.
Which they should
Mm-hmm.
stop calling this a phone. I've been saying this for
It's
years. This is
you make
not
a
a
good
phone.
point. You make a
This
good
is
point.
something way beyond a phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a remote
But
control to your life.
correct, 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 correct. So I'd be interested to get your perspective on kind of how commerce has changed,
Yeah.
particularly between the radio medium and the podcast medium.
Huge,
Talk about that.
huge concept what you're talking about right now. And I don't think that a lot of people have realized the transition, if you will, that most of us have made into individualized content,
Hmm.
personalized, individualized content, because it has gone from a level of I don't want to say at the beginning, but sort of, let's say at the beginning of the technology tumble, let's call it. You want to listen to something audio related. You had radio, you have satellite radio, which is of course just kind of like cable radio, if you
Hmm.
will. And then of course you had podcasts, which were available in very specific mediums.
Right.
And what started to happen, I'd say somewhere around 2010, maybe a little bit before. Now, this is across all spectrums of media, period, but let's kind of throw radio within that big realm of things. What started to happen is, the internet allowed people to sort of cut off the things that they didn't necessarily want to listen to, and hone especially in on the things that they did want to listen to. And over the next couple of years, Facebook and a number of other technology companies began to develop algorithms that tracked our behavior online. It's some of the creepy algorithms that we see now. You talk about
Yes.
boats, let's say,
Yes.
and then on your Facebook is a
Yes.
commercial for boats, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
that technology, when that technology was being perfected from 2010 to, let's say, 2014, 15 or so, and they were forced to change for a different reason, but I don't want to go down that path right now. But anyway, for about 4 or 5 years, they really honed in on the ability to identify, not they like, the ominous day, but technology companies
Right.
really began to hone in on being able to track your likes and interests through your online footprint, through your phone footprint, basically. And when that happened, what we started to realize is that people have absolutely no problem spending 90% or more of their time on one thing or a few different things, right? The idea that we had on the radio with satellite radio and traditional terrestrial radio, as you say, offers a broad spectrum for a broad spectrum of people, right? The
Mm-hmm.
radio station that you listen to, you might listen to it all day, but you really only like one or two of the shows on there. The other
Mm-hmm.
ones you'll tolerate, but you really only like one or two shows, or you like one or two personalities at that station, right? So now, a couple of years later, after that, you are now able to say, you know what, those three personalities, I'm only going to listen to their shows today, right? And then I'm only going to listen to other podcasts or other radio stations from San Francisco and from
Right.
Austin and from
Right.
Washington. So it's developing this, again, narrowing of content for the consumer. They can choose specifically what they want. Now we live in a society, if you will. We live, in a world where we're picking specifically something that you want. If I want to listen to a podcast about, whales, and that's my thing, there's probably a whole list that you can go on
Yes.
and just listen to whale content
Right.
all day
Right.
long if
Right.
that's what you want to do.
Right.
And,
Right.
and technology companies have found that that's more profitable than offering people a wide buffet menu list of things throughout the course of the day, a variety of things, if you will. And so podcasts fit perfectly within the new scheme of
Mm-hmm.
things. There are some people that just want to listen to conservative radio, or they just want to listen to, X, Y, or Z, or they have a particular personality or a list of personalities that they like to listen to. And so that world is very fitting for the individual creator. You don't have to have a huge platform. I don't have to work at CBS or ESPN or Fox, in order to have a platform that is big enough for me to get attention, right? And it now becomes about the content that I, as an individual, am creating. Do you like that out there? The ominous you, do you like that? Well, then you will watch it. And if you don't like it, you typically won't. The good thing about that is podcasts live on the internet. Like I said, unlimited audience size and participation in that case. And so that's why I think we've seen a really a takeoff of podcasts and really a draining of some of the traditional radio and satellite radio sources.
Right. So that raises kind of two separate issues. One, I've been thinking about for the last couple of years, particularly when I see that you have, for example, Bill Simmons is a guy that I've listened to. He has, he does sports, content, and now
Mm-hmm.
he has his own podcast network, which I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember the name of it right now.
I think I want to say Grantland.
Grantland was the
The
predecessor.
first one, yeah,
Yeah, that was the predecessor.
yeah.
So, but then he went out on his own. Now he's making a ton of money. I guess the question is, how like with radio and with traditional TV, it was
Mm-hmm.
pretty easy to see how you made money, which is to say that if your Nielsen ratings were at a certain level, or if whatever the Nielsen is for radio was at a certain level,
Mm-hmm.
which Word didn't have because they never invested in whatever they were supposed to invest into. But that's
Been,
another
been been
topic.
down that road and back, yes.
So in any event, if the Nielsen's show that you are at a certain level, okay, then
Mm-hmm.
you can charge a premium
Yeah.
for advertisers to get those 1 2 minute 30-second slots, whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With podcasts, how do they do that? Like what how did they do that, right? How did they
Mm-hmm.
make that determination? It seems to me I don't know whether have they perfected how they do that to make sure that
Man,
they're getting
yeah.
the bang for their buck.
I think another really great question. You're hitting on like all the really important, I think, points of podcast too, and understanding some of the points behind the business of podcast,
Right.
as well, which is very important. I say this to people all the time when they reach out to me for advice about making a podcast, and they say, "Well, how can I get my podcast popping?" And like, what's going to get my podcast popping? You know, I always say start with the content. You always, as a creator, I'm always going to say start with the content.
Right.
Okay, figure out what you're actually going to do. Now beyond that, the bells and whistles of it become important because in the podcast world, things like clicks, the podcast world is the internet world, so to speak. I used to work at a major company as well, major sports company that did online content every day. And one of the focuses that we talked about was not, unfortunately, content. It was how can we get people to click and stay on our website, click to our website, click through our website, and then stay on our website to consume more content, right? That was always the focus. And the reason why is because that's kind of the new metric, if you will. Like Nielsen ratings, as you mentioned, were just, how many people listen on average at any particular point in the day. There's a percentage that, numbers, whatever, right? But for podcasts, that live in a world of downloads and subscribers, right? A download doesn't mean if somebody clicks download on your podcast, right? That doesn't mean that they listen to it. It just simply means that there has now been a metric, one download for this podcast. Maybe that person downloads it and then, has it on their phone or their MP3 player or whatever else like that and never listens to it. But it still counts, as a download. Now there's a lot of streaming podcasts too. So there's ways of tracking streams over time and things like that. So if people click on that stream, for any given amount of time, that's a metric that can be used for that. But, also in the podcast world, I think an interesting, sort of swing on the value of advertisements and things like that is how hot are you? You know what I mean? It's great to have subscribers. It's great to have downloads. It's great to have, follows. But what you want to be is sort of a gravitational pull for internet content. As I said, the internet is much bigger audience than anything that Nielsen has ever tried, I think, to sort of analyze, because you have so many users, so many different devices as well that pop up on that could impact that number in terms of like, again, download, subscriptions, streams, all that other stuff. So I think it's a mystery mix combination of, like that social trend of how hot are you? With the Bill Simmons example, he came from not from ESPN, but he was at ESPN at, a particular point.
Right.
And he was able to use that as a launching pad, if you will, to other sort of things. People were like, hey, I like that Bill Simmons guy. Let me go invest in this podcast or in this podcast network or in the blog, however else you want to do that. But, if let's say you're not starting out at a high platform and you'd like to go from the bottom, to the top, if you will, you still need to be able to develop in some way, shape, or form that sort of magnetic pool of internet users that are out there because there's so many of them. Right. The ability to be able to attract a significant number of them is what, drives up, if you will, the value of a particular podcaster, and not just in advertisements, but what that podcaster, because that podcaster has such a gravitational pull, has so much of a pull of the audience. That's where, partnerships and other things like that sort of work out. You see a lot of YouTubers that in the middle of their video, right, they'll stop and be like, just wanted to say, if you have time, check out, Red House Mouse, and they can hook you up with the best mouse, So you have these partnerships where companies are like, man, this YouTuber, this streamer, this gamer is getting 10,000 streams a day for whatever reason, right? However they got there, but they're getting 10,000 streams a day. I don't care what he's talking about. Right. We want our product in front of them. We want him to just mention our name during one of those streams, and we have a humongous audience that comes our way.
So it's interesting that you say that because kind of a perfect example of that recently was. And you're a sports person, right? You
absolutely,
yeah. Right. So Floyd Mayweather fought Jake Paul, maybe
one of those Pauls. I get them confused.
One of those Paul brothers, right? And the Paul brothers are just like YouTube guys, right?
That's it.
They're just YouTube guys, right? But they have such a massive following, that they got Floyd Mayweather to do an exhibition where obviously he got paid a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
So it just speaks to how our media kind of ecosystem has so radically changed that you could have somebody like that, and then no disrespect to them, they're just not professional athletes, right?
That's right.
But
Yeah.
because of their following, they could attract an all-time great to do this exhibition because he knew he was going to make so much money.
That's it.
To me, it's still like, it's fascinating to me. I honestly still do not understand it. Do not understand the kind of economic model that behind it. But another example is this whole versus phenomenon that started last year, right? When the pandemic hit, right? Like what is that, right? So
what is it, right?
Like how are they getting these people, right? How are they getting these people? They must be able. I mean, they're obviously paying them. They have to pay them, right? They're not volunteering to do this, right? So how does that work? Like, where they?
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing because Versus also, just in that example, the most recent example about Versus, I say the same thing all the time. I look at this and I'm like, how is this still a thing? Like the first one or two times it happened early in the pandemic, we're all locked away in the house. We got to come up with ideas for entertainment. I get it, right? But like after like the fifth or sixth one, I'm like, are you serious? Like, we're really? It started out as this Instagram thing, and now it's it's been bought out, been bought and sold and recreated and put on all types of bigger networks and things like that. But that's a perfect example again of why would any of the artists be interested in doing something like this? It's a great question. But now again, it doesn't matter by hook or by crook, however you get there. Versus is viewed millions of times a week, and it's mind-boggling to me, right? Like I'm like, really? But it doesn't matter why or how you get to that point. If you are streamed millions of times a week, it doesn't matter. Your vitamin water, your Ford motor cars, your Xbox, your iPhone, you want a piece of you want a piece of that. You want your logo floating around in the background, or you want like even the very platform that it was on Instagram at first, and Instagram was loving it before it was sold. The idea that the only place you could watch these Versus things after it blew up was on Instagram. So there's something good in it, not only for the brands that might invest in the actual program itself, but for Instagram. It's going to draw more people into the app. So now Instagram has a stake, if you will, in the success of Versus, not a literal one at that point, but they have a stake in wanting to see Versus and products that are like Versus. Again, they have that internet gravitational pull of an audience. They want shows like that on these platforms. And guess what? Instagram, Facebook, everything else like that, they are going to reach out to the creators of Versus. They're going to reach out to these people and say, how can we make it as easy as possible for you to create content on our platform? It might not be a money exchange, right? Now, maybe Facebook's not paying for the deal, if you will, but maybe Facebook says, we'll give you a Versus tool button that, you folks can push and immediately come to your page or something like that, right? That it's good for business on both sides. That's the new model right now for, like I said, that's the model that podcasts fall into, the group that podcasts fall into in terms of how the sway sort of works and how the money sort of flows.
Right. So, as you were talking about Versus being bought and sold, I was thinking, I wonder how much Swiss Beats made off of that deal, right? He could, who Swiss Beats is. You have to know. I know who he is. You know who he is, right? It would be malpractice.
He hangs out with Alicia Keys, I think, something
correct. So he was the founder of it. So I was wondering, like, he might have made more money off of that deal than he made the entire rest of his career producing major hits. Like that is a possibility, because at the point that they sold it, it had to be worth at least several $100 million at least, just in terms of the like you said, this kind of the magnetic pull that they
what it can turn into. Yeah, that stuff is valuable. That stuff is extremely valuable. Just to give you a sports example too. I mean, NIL. I don't know, if you're familiar with what the NCAA's rules now say about college athletes. They can now use their name, image, and likeness. They can
Right.
sell that, if you will,
Right.
to different advertisers or companies that want to endorse them. That's the reason why that's such a huge deal, is because those players are going to make more in advertising dollars, likely in advertising dollars, than they will during the course of their professional careers, especially the football players, which have who have shorter careers and things like that. But they're big stars in college, so they can actually cash in at a time when their image and their likeness is valuable.
Probably
Oftentimes more valuable.
Most of them.
Exactly. The most valuable thing. LeBron James was one of the early pioneers of this, right? He's drafted. He's 17, almost 18 years old. He signs a $90 million contract with Nike, right? $90 million. He wouldn't make $90 million in a contract until I think his second deal. So in the NBA, I'm saying, in terms of playing. So, that kind of thing used to be the exception for the superstar 0.001% of human beings that are amazing as LeBron James, right? That used to be reserved for them. Now you have a lot more individuals, people like the Paul brothers, as you mentioned, or, whoever that is able to create this magnetic audience has access to being able to, the Kardashians, are entire existence,
the whole thing. It's absurd.
That's what it is. You can now sell your image and your likeness if enough people are interested in it, right? Like Kardashians wouldn't be who they are if people didn't watch the show, if people didn't consume the content, if people didn't always sort of chase and try and keep up, no pun intended, with the said Kardashians. So it's a two-way system, right? Like if we buy into it, then it pays and they keep doing it, right? Kind of back and forth. And so long as there's money being exchanged on that super highway, there are going to be companies that are going to want to dip in the middle and sort of take their piece every single time. And they want a bigger and bigger piece of what's hot. They don't care what it is, so long as it's hot.
So the other piece about it that I did want to touch on is with podcasts and with basically people using the internet as the real source of their entertainment, of getting their information, like everything, right? That it leads to, and I think has led to, this segmentation in society, right? Kind of, you have these, if I'm interested in this is the only place I'll go. I'm interested in, whatever the example was you used, if I'm interested in pottery, then I'll only go to the podcasts and the websites and the YouTube channels for pottery. Like right now, I'm like obsessed with golf, right? Because I'm horrific, but I'm trying to move up to just being bad, right? And so I watch YouTube channels. Like I subscribe to a number of YouTube channels. They now populate a lot of my, particularly my Instagram. Not so much Facebook, but I don't really go on Facebook that much. But in terms of kind of what I watch, and then of course there's the golf channel on. So like if I really want to just, to your point, focus solely on that, I can focus solely on that. But then I'm not getting any different perspective on anything else, right? So that has manifested in our society in a way that, I mean, to me, it's not healthy. I mean, I don't know whether it's me being kind of an old fogey, but I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it is it's an unfortunate consequence of that sort of society. There are advantages of us being able to individualize content, of course, like of course we can get more emotionally excited about content, and I think on a stream of content, but as you say, we're no longer forced, if you will, or we don't have to, if you will, expose ourselves, if you will, to different other perspectives and other things. And there is a value in that, especially in the United States, where we are not a country of one homogenous people. We didn't all come from the same place. We don't all look the same. We are a country of a lot of diversity, if you will. Right. And so, this concept, this idea that we can kind of retreat back into our own corners and we can interact with people of a particular community that's going to agree with what we say, it has had a tangible impact. The most recent example is the 2016 election, that we see that election, or the election that year, was heavily influenced by the conversations and the debates and the arguments and the posts and the advertisements and the marketing that was targeted for those that were online. I say it time and time again. There's a hundred different things we can talk about in terms of the 2016 election and impacting things that impacted the turnout one way or the other. But the biggest, in my opinion, impact was what happened in those online spaces. And what we started to see is that as these sort of camps, if you will, started to be built, again, after Facebook kind of creates and other companies create these algorithms that allow us to kind of be in our corners. When it came down to 2016, it was a really hotly contested sort of issues thing, right? We were going back and forth, and there were people who said, look, there is no middle ground about this particular issue. Pick your issue, right? There is no middle ground about this. I am on this side. I have spent the last several months or maybe even years interacting with people online who have been who the algorithm has been narrowing closer and closer and closer to be just my kind of opinion and just my kind of people, right? I've now carved this out coming into this. And the people on the other side, if you will, have been doing the exact same thing. And during the course of an election, which requires all people to come together to, if you will, discuss these issues before voting, all hell broke loose. And that's why you didn't have a homogenous group of people that some thought like this and some thought like that. You had two warring camps that were then set up. And there were a lot of influences, like from outside actors who may or may not have been Russian, who were creating fake ads and who were creating fake profiles, who were creating alternate names, like Black Lives Matter, Seattle or something, to try and convince people. They would create this group and have real people join the group only to wage war against the other side, right? And what we found in 2016, what I thought was the most disappointing part about all of that, is it created a huge bubble of voter apathy, both before, during, and after the election. Before the election, because there were a lot of people that were like, man, this country is screwed up. Why? Because 75% of their interaction with other people comes online. And I just described to you what the online political environment was leading up to 2016, right? So if that's your view, if that's your lens of the world, then 3/4 of it is just arguing about people who seem like they're idiots on the other side, then you develop this apathy that says, you know what, no matter who wins, I think we're just screwed, right? And there were a lot of people that developed that attitude in 2016, and I think that is the main driver. That's one of the effects of what you're talking about now. People being able to retreat within their own corners means that we don't come together, if you will, on issues. The American sort of idealistic way of things, which hasn't really happened too much over the years anyway, but the idea, at least, that we're supposed to come together and, sort of talk out these issues and sort of figure out these issues so we can live together, is happening much less. And that also means in Congress as well, which means nothing gets done legislatively.
Well, I think that, I think this whole segmentation has caused tremendous issues. And if you talk about the fact that America is America, right? So we can talk about what America is and what America has been. There is, though, this sense that the American experiment was, in fact, an experiment that continued to happen, and that over time, America continued to refine itself to get ever closer to the ideals that it professes and that it proselytizes across the globe, right? But with this last, the last, 5 or 6 years, because really, to me, it became much more pronounced during Obama's
second term.
That, this whole, there was almost like a radicalizing that started to happen.
Yes.
In certain groups, right? And the radicalizing was the elixir for the radicalizing was Facebook, was Twitter, was YouTube, was Reddit. Some of
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
where people could go and just hear kind of whatever they wanted to hear, and then carry it into the public sphere or speak to their representative, who then would turn and themselves be radicalized, right? Because they're
Right.
trying to
Mm-hmm.
hold on to their who they see are their natural constituents.
Yep.
So to me, the 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 essence of the American experiment, at least as it related to government, was that you could have people with disparate views, and because they all respected the rules in terms of respected the fact that it was one person one vote, or
Mm-hmm.
one person one vote in Congress,
Yeah.
that there were rules in place to encourage dialogue between the parties, all of that stuff. Like all of that stuff is being severely corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
such that all of that stuff, all of that process is being severely corrupted. And then to your point, you have people who are saying, it doesn't matter who's in office. It's all screwed up. It doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because then that makes it right for people like our former president to become president if it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, I guess the question is, going back to the internet, like like what can we put in place, if anything? What kind of mechanism, what kind of something can we put in place to lower the heat, to fight against kind of this natural segmentation that happens when people go on the internet and find their own kind of corners to go to?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to think about, now that we are where we are. How do we reverse?
Correct.
Excuse me. It seemed, rather easy when you think about it to get here, but um I think you brought up an important part about, how the electorate sort of starts to reflect some of that stuff. We've seen that almost cartoonishly in the last 5 or 6 years, with the, sort of energy that became the Trump movement on the Republican side of things, which eventually became Trump running for president and so on and so forth. Um, I think, that energy in and of itself took on a different, sort of feel than what it traditionally did before. It was no longer some people are on this side of the line and some people are on that side of the line, and we'll just kind of figure out where America is in the middle. I think that sort of two-party balance, I have a lot of criticisms about the two-party system, but I think that two-party balance, if you will, in the context of America and the Constitution and all this other stuff, helps sort of ideologically keep us within a realm where, as you say, we can continue to work towards a more perfect union, as the Constitution says. Work toward, it doesn't say that we're going to achieve this perfect union and then after that we're good. Like, we have to continually work to do that. And with that traditional left versus right environment, you could kind of see, even though it was very hard at times, but you could kind of see at least the path to progress, right? So when one of those sides decides to shrivel up and wilt and become something different, there's no longer a balance of political ideology anymore, because one side is no longer focused on keeping the ideals of conservatism or the right in place, if you will, and they now have this sort of cartoonish behavior behind them that is all focused on like winning
Right.
and sort of creating flowery images about what America is and the
Right.
condition that America is in, rather than representing traditional conservative ideals, limited government, individual responsibility, and the lower taxes, the kind of stuff that conservatives typically concern themselves with, right? Like they have moved away from that and have become, like I said, cartoonishly something else. And now in response to that, you have Democrats or people on the left or liberals, however you want to describe the left, who have now responded to that, right? And a lot of what you see from the left, if you will, is a response to the strange and sometimes horrendous behavior of these new conservatives. These are not traditional conservatives.
Right.
These are new
Right.
sort of Trumpites, if you will,
Right.
that have developed on the right. And it has thrown off that very delicate balance that we had even if it was just a semblance of it before this era of politics, it threw off that balance. And since then, instead of finding our center, we have instead found ways to ensure that one group since then tries to completely cover over the other group,
Right.
because that's the only way to ensure that that undergroup doesn't get anything passed. Right. The group that's on top, they won't get anything passed either, because all their energy is focused on stopping the opposition, right? But the group that's underneath, they won't get anything done because they're being stopped by the group with the numbers, if you will. So we've seen that every 2 years, it kind of shifts a little bit from one side to the other, but that's the general gist of what's happened politically. And that is somewhat, unfortunately, a replication of what's happening, I guess, with the actual citizens themselves. But I do think that there's one solution to both of those issues, right? The solution has to be an understood, sort of meaning of nobody wins unless we all win. And I know that sounds kind of we are the world-ish, sort of with that, but I think we spend a lot of time, trying to establish that there is one central right. You know what I mean? And that our side is that right. It doesn't matter what you believe politically. And I've talked to people on both sides of the aisle who I think are brilliant sometimes, and so some are like, whoa, at the same time. And the thing is, everybody is of course entitled to that opinion, but where things really get off the rails is when we start subscribing to these very cartoonish camps on either side of the line, right? Like Democrats have some cartoonish camps too. They have some actors that are going above and beyond to just tell you that the red right is the devil, no matter what, right? And maybe there's aspects of that that's true, but it doesn't help for the idea of what we ultimately want in this country. I might lean left, just as an example, right? I'm not saying I do, but let's say I lean left. A perfect country for me is not a country that leans all the way to the left. Everybody just leans to the left, right? That's not the more perfect union that we have. There's a ton of issues that I have with the way that we got here, as in the United States, in the troubled history, but we're here now. And in terms of what to do, as you say, moving forward from this now, we've got to understand that concept. It's not about convincing everybody that your side is right. It's about understanding how, at this point, we can we can all rather live as one single society in the most complex experiment of a country, arguably in the world.
Keaton Nichols, a Nicholsworth. Fantastic podcast. You should follow it. We appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I said to my producer, I was like, this is going to be the easiest interview we've ever done. He's going to have so much to say. All I need to do is kind of like ride the wave. And I was absolutely right. And everything that you said was awesome. And we appreciate you being on.
Well, thank you so much for having me and letting me rant for a little bit. But excellent questions, by the way. And they're things that people aren't asking in this industry right now. I have these conversations kind of behind the scenes with, some of my producer friends and journalism friends and things like that. So it's refreshing you bringing these topics out. And I hope people, will get something from it and continue to listen.
Thank you so much. And to our audience, we look forward to having this conversation and keeping it going. Thanks again. Take care.